After my son died, I had to live with my daughter-in-law for 2 weeks. On the first night, I heard her whisper, "Once we get our hands on the money, we're sending the old hag to a nursing home." I smiled. I'd been waiting for that moment. What she didn't know was that there were 2 inheritances, and she only knew about one of them. The funeral had been 3 days ago. Michael, my only child, gone at 42 from a massive heart attack while jogging in the park, the same park where I'd taught him to ride his bicycle 37 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me that the place of so much joy had become the site of my deepest grief. I sat in what used to be Michael's home office, now serving as my temporary bedroom, staring at the photos Jessica had grudgingly allowed me to place on the nightstand. Michael at graduation, Michael on his wedding day, looking so happy despite my reservations about his bride. Michael holding the twins when they were newborns, his face glowing with the kind of love I'd felt the day he was born. The house felt different without him.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
Jessica had already started rearranging things, moving Michael's books to the garage, replacing his favorite reading chair with something more modern. When I'd mentioned keeping a few of his things in the living room for the children to remember their father by, she'd given me that tight smile and said, "We need to move forward, Elena. Living in the past isn't healthy. Move forward." As if 37 years of memories could be packed away like winter clothes. The twins, Connor and Sophia, both 16 now, had been polite but distant since I'd arrived. I understood. They were grieving their father and trying to navigate their mother's mood swings. Jessica had always been theatrical, but since Michael's death, she'd become unpredictable. One moment she was the grieving widow, dabbing her eyes with tissues. The next she was sharp and businesslike, talking about practical matters and moving on. I'd noticed things during those first 3 days. How Jessica had already changed the passwords on Michael's accounts. How she'd started sorting through his personal belongings with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment. How she'd redirected sympathy flowers to the kitchen instead of letting them stay in the living room where the children might find comfort in them. "People need to see us healing," she'd explained when I questioned the flower relocation. "We can't appear to be wallowing." I'd offered to stay in a hotel, but Jessica had insisted I remain in the house. "Family needs to stick together during times like these," she'd said, though her eyes never quite met mine when she spoke. At the time, I'd thought it was grief. Now I knew better. The conversation I'd overheard tonight had shattered any illusions I'd harbored about my daughter-in-law's motivations. I'd gotten up around midnight to get a glass of water, my arthritis making sleep difficult. The hallway was dark, and I'd moved quietly, not wanting to wake anyone. But as I passed Jessica's bedroom, I heard her voice, low and urgent. The door was slightly ajar. I know, she was saying into her phone. "But we have to be smart about this. The old woman is suspicious already." I'd frozen in the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. 2 weeks, maybe 3 at most. Just long enough to look like we tried to make it work. Then we can start the process. I've already researched facilities. There's one about an hour away that takes Medicare. A pause. Then Jessica's voice again, sharper now. "Of course I've thought about the money. Elena's got at least 400,000 in savings, plus the house Michael told me about. Once we get power of attorney, we can sell her place and handle her finances properly. The kids need college funds and this house needs work." Another pause. I pressed myself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. She'll fight it at first, but look at her. She's old. She's grieving. She's confused. It won't be hard to prove she can't live independently. Once we get our hands on the money, we're sending the old hag to a nursing home where she belongs. The person on the other end must have asked a question because Jessica laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Trust me, I've got this figured out." Michael was always too soft with her, always worried about her feelings. But I'm not Michael. I see things clearly. She's a burden we can't afford anymore. I stood there in the dark hallway for several minutes after Jessica hung up, my mind reeling. The casual cruelty in her voice when she called me an old hag hurt almost as much as the cold calculation behind her plan. She'd already researched nursing homes, already figured out how to access my money, already decided my fate. But here's what Jessica didn't know. what Michael had never told her because I'd asked him not to. The account she knew about, the one with $400,000, was my visible money. It was real, but it was also a test. You see, I'd learned long ago to be careful about who knew about my finances. When Michael got married, I'd shown Jessica one bank statement during a discussion about college funds for the twins. I wanted to see what kind of person she really was. Her eyes had lit up in a way that told me everything I needed to know. But Michael had been so happy, so in love. I'd kept my concerns to myself. The real inheritance, the one Michael never knew existed, was sitting in investment accounts and CDs that I'd built up over 45 years of careful saving and smart investing. Money from my late husband's life insurance policy that I'd never touched. Dividends from stocks I'd bought in the 1980s when everyone thought I was foolish. Real estate investments that had appreciated beyond my wildest dreams. I'd been raised during the Depression by parents who taught me never to put all my eggs in one basket. They'd seen too many people lose everything because they trusted the wrong person or institution. So I'd spread my wealth across different banks, different investment firms, different types of assets. Jessica thought she was planning to steal $400,000. She had no idea she was actually planning to steal $12 million. I made my way back to my temporary bedroom, my mind already working. Jessica wanted to play games? Fine. I'd been playing the game of survival a lot longer than she had. She thought she could manipulate a grieving old woman into signing away her independence and her money. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Thomas Bradshaw had been my financial advisor for 15 years, and more importantly, he'd been a close friend of my late husband. He'd understand what needed to be done. There were other numbers I'd need to call too. My estate attorney, Margaret Chen, who'd helped me set up the complex web of trusts and investments that Jessica knew nothing about. Dr. Patricia Webb, my physician, who could attest to my mental competency if needed. And most importantly, Linda Morrison at the private investigation firm I'd used years ago when I'd suspected my former business partner of embezzlement. I would need evidence of Jessica's plans, documentation of her true intentions, because I wasn't just going to protect my money from her. I was going to protect my grandchildren from a mother who saw them as nothing more than tools for manipulation. Tomorrow, I would start making calls. Tonight, I would lie in this bed in my dead son's house and plan how to protect not just my money, but my grandchildren's future from their mother's greed. Jessica thought she had me figured out. She thought I was just another confused old woman who could be easily manipulated and discarded. What she didn't realize was that I'd been protecting myself and my assets from people like her my entire life. I'd survived an abusive first marriage, built a successful business from nothing, and accumulated wealth that most people could only dream of. The only difference was that this time, the predator was family. But blood doesn't excuse betrayal. And I was done being anyone's victim. The next morning, I woke before dawn and lay still in the narrow bed, listening to the house come alive around me. Jessica's alarm went off at 6:30, followed by the sound of her shower running. The twins would be up soon for school, and I needed to act normal, whatever that meant anymore. I dressed carefully in one of my simpler outfits, a navy cardigan and gray slacks that made me look exactly like what Jessica expected to see. A harmless elderly woman overwhelmed by grief. The performance had already begun. By the time I made it to the kitchen, Jessica was pouring coffee into a travel mug, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She wore a black dress that managed to look both morning-appropriate and flattering, with heels that clicked authoritatively against the tile floor. "Good morning, Elena," she said without looking up from her phone. "I made extra coffee. Help yourself." "Thank you, dear." I kept my voice soft, slightly shaky. "Did you sleep well?" Her eyes flicked to me briefly. "As well as can be expected." "Grief is exhausting." I nodded sympathetically, pouring coffee with hands that I let tremble just slightly. "I know what you mean. I've been having trouble sleeping too. Sometimes I get confused about where I am when I wake up." It was a small seed, But I watched Jessica's expression sharpen with interest. She was already cataloging signs of my supposed decline. Connor appeared first, grabbing a piece of toast and mumbling a greeting. He had Michael's dark hair but Jessica's sharp features, and at 16 he was caught in that awkward space between boyhood and becoming a man. Since his father's death, he'd become even more withdrawn, spending most of his time in his room with headphones on. "Morning, Grandma," he said, and I caught the genuine affection in his voice despite his teenage awkwardness. "Good morning, sweetheart. How are you holding up?" He shrugged, the universal teenage response to difficult questions. "Okay, I guess." Jessica's phone buzzed and she glanced at it with a frown. "Connor, remind your sister she has a dentist appointment after school. I'll pick you both up." As she spoke, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. She was already referring to appointments and schedules without including me. Small things, but they painted a picture of a future where I simply wasn't present. Sophia joined us a few minutes later, moving with the graceful awkwardness of a 16-year-old girl who hadn't quite grown into her long legs yet. She had Michael's gentle eyes and my late husband's stubborn chin. And of all the family members, she seemed to be taking her father's death the hardest. "Hi, Grandma," she said quietly, accepting my hug with the fierce grip of someone holding on too tightly. "How are you sleeping, sweetheart?" I asked, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "Not great. I keep having weird dreams." Jessica looked up sharply from her phone. "Sophia, we've talked about this. You need to focus on positive thoughts. Dwelling on sadness isn't healthy." I watched my granddaughter's face close off, the way teenagers do when they're told their feelings are wrong. "Sorry, Mom. Don't apologize for grieving," I said gently, earning a sharp look from Jessica. "It's normal to have dreams when we're processing loss. Your father would want you to feel whatever you need to feel." "Elena," Jessica's voice carried a warning. "I think we should stick to encouraging forward thinking." The twins exchanged a glance, and I filed that away. They were old enough to sense the tension, even if they didn't understand its source. After the kids left for school, Jessica's mask slipped slightly. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her manicured fingers drumming against her coffee mug. "Elena, I've been thinking about our living situation." "Here it comes," I thought, arranging my face into an expression of confused concern. "Oh?" I said, letting a slight quaver enter my voice. "This house isn't really set up for someone who might need extra help. And with the kids' schedules and my work?" She trailed off, letting me fill in the blanks. "I don't want to be a burden," I said, playing my part perfectly. "Maybe I should look into other arrangements." "Well," Jessica leaned forward, her voice taking on a tone of false concern. "I've been doing some research. There are some wonderful senior communities nearby, places where you'd have people your own age, activities, medical support if you need it." "Senior communities?" I let confusion color my voice. "But I'm not ready for that yet. I'm only 71. I know. Jessica's voice became soothing, patronizing. "But think about it practically. What if something happened to you while you were alone? What if you fell or got confused or—" She was good at this. I had to give her that. Planting seeds of doubt, making me question my own capabilities. "I suppose you're right," I said slowly. "But I'd want to see these places myself. Make sure they're nice." "Of course." Jessica's smile was bright and completely false. "I'll set up some tours. We want you to be comfortable with whatever decision we make." "We," as if this was a collaborative decision. After Jessica left for work, I waited 20 minutes to make sure she wasn't coming back for something forgotten. Then I retrieved my phone from the bedroom and began making the calls I'd planned the night before. "Thomas Bradshaw's office," came the familiar voice of his secretary. "Hello, Mary. This is Elena Castellanos. I need to speak with Thomas urgently." "Of course, Mrs. Castellanos. He's in a meeting, but I'll have him call you back within the hour." Next, I called Margaret Chen, my estate attorney. Margaret had helped me navigate the complex world of asset protection when I'd first started accumulating serious wealth, and she understood better than anyone the importance of keeping certain information private. "Elena, I'm so sorry for your loss." Margaret's voice was warm with genuine sympathy. "How are you holding up? It's been difficult." I admitted. But I'm calling about a legal matter. I may need to accelerate some of the protections we put in place for my grandchildren. There was a pause. Has something happened? Their mother is planning to have me declared incompetent so she can access my finances. She doesn't know about the protected assets, but I want to make sure the twins are completely safeguarded. I see. Margaret's voice became crisp and professional. Can you come in today? We should review everything and make sure we're ahead of any potential challenges. By the time Jessica returned home that evening, I had spent the day setting up a network of protection that she couldn't even imagine. Thomas had confirmed that all my major assets were in accounts and investments that Jessica had no knowledge of. Margaret had expedited the creation of additional trust funds for the twins' education and future needs, and Linda Morrison had agreed to begin discreet surveillance of Jessica's activities. How was your day? Jessica asked, her tone suggesting she was really asking whether I'd had any concerning incidents she could document. Quiet, I said, settling into Michael's old reading chair that I'd moved back to the living room while she was gone. I did some thinking about what you said this morning. Jessica's eyes lit up with interest. Oh? You're probably right about me needing more support. Sometimes I do feel a bit overwhelmed, confused about things. It physically hurt to say those words, to diminish myself in her eyes, but I could see Jessica practically salivating at this admission of weakness. I'm glad you're being honest with yourself, she said, settling onto the couch with the air of someone beginning an important conversation. It shows wisdom to recognize when we need help. I've been thinking about my finances too, I continued, watching her reaction carefully. All those accounts and investments, it's getting harder to keep track of everything. That must be stressful, Jessica said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You know, there are people who can help with that. Financial managers who specialize in helping seniors organize their affairs. Do you think that would be a good idea? I think it would be smart to have someone you trust overseeing things, Jessica said carefully. Maybe someone in the family who could make sure everything is handled properly. There it was. The opening move in her campaign to gain control of my finances. That's very thoughtful of you, I said, allowing gratitude to color my voice. I suppose Michael would have wanted me to accept help when I needed it. Jessica's smile was triumphant, and I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. She was already mentally spending my money, already planning my exile to some cut-rate nursing home. I'll make some calls tomorrow, she said. Find out what paperwork we'd need to get things properly organized. That night, I lay in the narrow bed and listened to Jessica on another phone call. This time, she wasn't being as careful about her volume. It's working perfectly, she was saying. She's already admitting to confusion and overwhelm. I give it another week before she's practically begging me to take over her finances. A pause. 400,000 is just the beginning. Once I have power of attorney, I can liquidate everything. Her house alone should be worth at least 200,000. Another pause. Then Jessica's laugh, sharp and satisfied. Trust me, by Christmas the kids and I will be in a much better position. And Elena will be safely tucked away somewhere where she can't interfere with our plans anymore. I smiled in the darkness. Jessica thought she was so clever, so calculating. She had no idea that every move she made was only strengthening my position. Tomorrow, the real game would begin, and Jessica was about to discover that she had seriously underestimated her opponent. The next 2 weeks passed in a carefully choreographed dance of deception. I played my part as the increasingly confused elderly woman, while Jessica played hers as the concerned daughter-in-law reluctantly taking on the burden of my care. She was good at it, I had to admit. To any outside observer, she appeared to be making genuine sacrifices for family. During the day, while Jessica was at work and the twins were at school, I met with my team of professionals to put the final pieces of my plan into place. Thomas had transferred additional funds into the education trusts for Connor and Sophia, ensuring their college futures were secure regardless of what happened with Jessica. Margaret had updated my will and advanced directives, making it crystal clear that I was of sound mind and body. And Linda's surveillance had provided some very interesting information about Jessica's activities. She's been meeting with an elder law attorney, Linda reported during our Friday afternoon meeting at a coffee shop across town, someone who specializes in competency proceedings. She's also toured 3 nursing facilities, all of them Medicaid facilities with less than stellar reputations. I sipped my coffee, digesting this information. What about her financial situation? Linda slid a folder across the table. That's where it gets interesting. She's been living well beyond her means for years. Credit card debt, a second mortgage on the house, car payments on a BMW she can't afford. Michael's life insurance payout helped, but it wasn't enough to solve her problems. I opened the folder and scanned the financial records Linda had obtained through her contacts. Jessica was drowning in debt, which explained the urgency of her plans for my money. There's something else, Linda continued. She's been corresponding with someone named Derek Walsh. He appears to be some kind of financial advisor, but not the legitimate kind. More like someone who helps people access assets they're not legally entitled to. My blood ran cold. What kind of assets? Elder financial abuse is his specialty. He's never been convicted, but he's been investigated multiple times for helping families gain illegal access to elderly relatives' accounts. This was worse than I'd thought. Jessica wasn't just planning to steal my money. She was working with someone who made a living helping people do exactly that. That evening, Jessica made her move. "Elena," she said as we sat in the living room after dinner, "I've been talking to some professionals about your situation." I looked up from the magazine I was pretending to read, letting confusion cloud my features. "My situation? Your finances? Your living arrangements? Your future care needs?" Jessica's voice was patient, the tone one might use with a child. "I want to make sure you have the best possible support." "That's very thoughtful of you," I said slowly. "What kind of professionals?" "An elder law attorney, for starters. Someone who can help us make sure all your legal affairs are in order. And I found a wonderful financial advisor who specializes in helping seniors protect their assets." Protect. The word was laughable coming from her. "I don't understand," I said, allowing a slight tremor to enter my voice. "Are my affairs not in order?" Jessica leaned forward, her expression becoming earnest and concerned. "Elena, I need to be honest with you. I've been worried about some of the things you've said and done lately. Forgetting where you put things, getting confused about appointments, sometimes seeming unsure about where you are. These were all things I'd been doing deliberately, small performances designed to give her exactly the ammunition she thought she needed. Have I been doing that?" I asked, letting genuine distress color my voice. "It's nothing to be ashamed of," Jessica said quickly. "It happens to lots of people as they get older. But it means we need to be proactive about protecting you and your assets." "What would that involve?" Jessica pulled out a folder from her purse. "Just some simple paperwork. A power of attorney that would allow me to help manage your finances if you become unable to do so yourself. Some documents that would ensure your medical wishes are followed. Nothing that would change anything right now. Just protection for the future." I stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. "This seems very complicated." "It's really not," Jessica assured me. "The attorney explained everything to me. This is just standard planning that every senior should have in place." "But what about Connor and Sophia?" I asked. "If something happens to me, what happens to the money I wanted to leave them?" Jessica's eyes gleamed. "Don't worry about that. Once I have power of attorney, I can make sure their college funds are properly managed. In fact, it might be better to consolidate everything under one person's oversight." There it was. Not only did she want to steal my money, she wanted to steal what I'd set aside for my grandchildren too. "I suppose that makes sense," I said hesitantly. "But I'd like to think about it for a few days." Jessica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. But Elena, these things can't wait forever. What if something happened to you tomorrow? What if you had another episode of confusion and made some poor financial decisions?" The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Sign over control now, or she'd use my supposed confusion to have me declared incompetent. "What kind of poor decisions?" I asked. "Well, for instance, yesterday you mentioned thinking about donating money to some charity that called you. Thank goodness I was there to stop you from making that mistake." I'd done no such thing, of course, but I nodded as if I remembered. "You're right. I do seem to be getting more confused about things." Jessica's triumph was almost visible. "That's exactly why we need these protections in place. I promise you, Elena, I have your best interests at heart, and the children's interests too." That night, I called Margaret Chen from my cell phone while sitting in my car in a parking lot several blocks from Jessica's house. "She's accelerating her timeline," I reported. "She wants me to sign power of attorney documents this week. Do the documents look legitimate?" I photographed them while she was out of the room. I'd sent the photos to Margaret earlier. "What do you think?" "They're legitimate forms, but they're extremely broad. If you signed these, she'd have access to everything you own, with very little oversight. Can we use this?" Absolutely. Her pushing you to sign such extensive powers of attorney when you've given no indication of actual incapacity could be seen as attempted financial exploitation, especially given her financial situation. What about her colleague, this Derek Walsh? Linda's information about him is very helpful. If we can prove Jessica's been consulting with someone who specializes in elder financial abuse, it strengthens our case considerably. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Jessica, I said over breakfast, I've thought about what you said, and you're right. I do need help. Her face lit up with satisfaction. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, but I want to meet with this attorney and financial advisor myself first. I want to understand exactly what I'd be agreeing to. Jessica's smile faltered slightly. That's not really necessary. I've already explained everything to them, and they understand your situation. I'm sure they do, but I'd feel better hearing it from them directly. After all, it's my money and my future we're talking about. I could see Jessica struggling with this. She wanted to argue, but doing so would reveal too much about her true motivations. Of course, she said finally. I'll set up meetings for next week. What Jessica didn't know was that I'd already arranged for my own attorney and financial advisor to attend those meetings. Margaret Chen and Thomas Bradshaw would be there, ostensibly as additional consultants to help me understand the documents, but really to witness whatever Jessica and her associates said. I was about to turn the tables on my daughter-in-law, and she had no idea what was coming. There's one other thing, I said, finishing my coffee. I'd like to tour some of those senior living communities you mentioned. Not because I'm ready to move, but just to see what options might be available in the future. Jessica practically beamed. I think that's very wise. I've already researched several options. I'm sure you have, I said quietly. That afternoon, while Jessica was at work, I received a call from Linda Morrison. I have some very interesting information, she said. Jessica's been in contact with someone at one of those nursing facilities, someone in their billing department. What kind of contact? The kind where she's been asking about payment structures and what happens to residents' assets. Specifically, what happens when someone runs out of money to pay for their care. My stomach turned. And it appears she's been told that once a resident's assets are depleted, they transition to Medicaid coverage. She's been calculating exactly how long your supposed $400,000 would last before you'd be indigent. The cold calculation of it took my breath away. Jessica wasn't just planning to steal my money. She was planning to warehouse me in a substandard facility until I died, friendless and forgotten. There's more, Linda continued. I managed to get a look at Derek Walsh's client files. He's currently working with 3 other families on similar schemes. In each case, the elderly family member has been declared incompetent and had their assets transferred to younger relatives. What happened to the elderly relatives? 2 are in nursing homes. The 3rd died shortly after the asset transfer was completed. I sat in my car outside the lawyer's office, my hands trembling with rage. This wasn't just about my money anymore. This was about Jessica's complete willingness to destroy my life for her financial gain. But I had something Jessica didn't know about. Something that would change everything. The next morning, I would begin phase 2 of my plan. Jessica thought she was dealing with a confused old woman with a modest inheritance. She was about to discover that she'd been hunting a dragon. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning at the offices of Hartwell & Associates, the elder law firm Jessica had chosen. I arrived 20 minutes early. As did Margaret Chen and Thomas Bradshaw. We'd coordinated our story carefully. They were additional consultants I'd asked to review any documents before I signed them. Jessica arrived precisely on time with a man I assumed was Derek Walsh. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of practiced charm that probably worked well on vulnerable seniors. His handshake was firm, his smile warm, and his eyes absolutely cold. "Mrs. Castellanos," he said. "Jessica has told me so much about you. I'm sorry for the loss of your son." "Thank you," I replied, allowing a slight tremor in my voice. "It's been very difficult." The attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Hartwell, gestured us into a conference room. The table was already set with documents, pens, and a notary stamp waiting nearby. They'd clearly expected this to be a simple signing ceremony. "Before we begin," I said, settling into my chair, "I'd like to introduce my consultants. This is Margaret Chen, my estate attorney, and Thomas Bradshaw, my financial advisor. I asked them to review any documents before I make any decisions." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jessica's smile became strained. Derek Walsh's eyes narrowed, and Patricia Hartwell looked like she'd swallowed something sour. "That's certainly your right," Hartwell said carefully, "though I'm not sure it's necessary. These are standard documents that we've explained thoroughly to Jessica. I'm sure they are, Margaret Chen said smoothly. But Mrs. Castellanos values a second opinion on important financial matters. I hope you don't mind if I review the documents. For the next hour, I watched Jessica squirm as Margaret asked pointed questions about the scope of the power of attorney, the oversight mechanisms, and the specific financial arrangements being proposed. Thomas, meanwhile, questioned Derek Walsh about his qualifications and methods. Mr. Walsh, Thomas said, his voice politely curious, I'm not familiar with your firm. What's your specialty? I help families navigate complex financial situations involving elderly relatives, Derek replied smoothly. Asset protection, long-term care planning, that sort of thing. Interesting. And how exactly do you protect elderly clients' assets? Derek's smile faltered slightly. Well, we ensure that assets are properly managed and positioned to qualify for government assistance programs when necessary. Margaret and Thomas exchanged a look. In plain English, Derek helped families hide or spend down elderly relatives' assets so they could qualify for Medicaid while the family kept the money. Mrs. Castellanos, Margaret said, turning to me, before you consider signing anything, I think we should discuss your complete financial picture. Have you shared all of your assets and accounts with Jessica? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I'm not sure, I said, looking confused. There are so many accounts, and I don't remember what I've told her and what I haven't. Jessica leaned forward quickly. Elena, we've gone over this. You have your checking account, your savings account with about $400,000, and your house. That's everything, right? I frowned as if trying to remember. Is it? I thought there were other things. What other things? Derek Walsh asked, his voice sharp with sudden interest. Well, I said slowly, there were those accounts Harold set up years ago, the ones from his life insurance money, and the stocks I bought back in the 80s. Oh, and the rental properties. The silence in the room was deafening. Rental properties? Jessica's voice was strangled. The 3 houses on Maple Street, I said, looking at her with confusion. Didn't I mention those? They bring in about $2,000 a month each. And then there are the commercial properties downtown. Derek Walsh looked like he was choking. Commercial properties? The office building and the strip mall, I continued, warming to my performance. Thomas, what are those worth now? Thomas consulted his folder with theatrical precision. The Maple Street properties are valued at approximately $1.2 million total. The commercial properties are worth roughly $3.8 million. Jessica's face had gone completely white. And then there are the investment accounts, I continued. The CDs, the stock portfolio, the municipal bonds Harold set up. I never touched those. What did you say they were worth, Thomas? Approximately $7.2 million as of last month, Thomas said calmly. Patricia Hartwell's pen clattered to the table. Derek Walsh sat back in his chair as if he'd been slapped, and Jessica made a small, strangled sound. I'm sorry, Margaret said, her voice professionally neutral, but I'm confused. Jessica, you said Mrs. Castellanos had approximately $400,000 in assets, but we're talking about more than $12 million here. I didn't know, Jessica whispered. You didn't know about assets worth $12 million? Margaret's eyebrows rose. That seems like a significant oversight for someone seeking power of attorney over Mrs. Castellanos' finances. Derek Walsh had recovered enough to lean forward. Mrs. Castellanos, with assets of this magnitude, you'll need much more sophisticated planning than we initially discussed. Actually, Thomas interjected, Mrs. Castellanos already has sophisticated planning in place. Her estate is held in multiple trusts, with professional management and clear succession planning. I'm not sure why she would need to grant power of attorney to anyone. I looked around the table with studied confusion. Did I do something wrong? Jessica said I needed help managing my money because I was getting confused. Getting confused about what? Margaret asked gently. Well, I paused, as if thinking hard. Yesterday I couldn't remember where I put my reading glasses, and sometimes I forget what day it is. Jessica says that means I shouldn't be handling money anymore. The silence that followed was profound. Mrs. Castellanos, Patricia Hartwell said carefully, forgetting where you put your glasses doesn't indicate financial incapacity. Do you remember your account numbers, your investment decisions, your property holdings? I nodded. Oh, yes. I remember all of that. I just can't remember little things sometimes. Derek Walsh stood up abruptly. I think there may have been some miscommunication about Mrs. Castellanos' needs. Perhaps we should reschedule after everyone has had time to review the situation. Actually, Margaret said, her voice taking on a steely edge, I think we should discuss the situation right now. Jessica, you've been telling Mrs. Castellanos that she needs to grant you power of attorney because she's becoming confused and unable to manage her affairs. But you yourself were unaware of 95% of her assets. How exactly were you planning to manage money you didn't know existed? Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Furthermore, Thomas added, Mr. Walsh, your specialty appears to be helping families access elderly relatives' assets for Medicaid planning purposes. But Mrs. Castellanos has no need for Medicaid planning, given her substantial assets. Why were you recommending strategies typically used for asset depletion? Derek Walsh's professional facade cracked completely. I think there's been a misunderstanding about the scope of services needed here. I think there has been, Margaret agreed. Mrs. Castellanos, do you understand what was being proposed here today? I allowed tears to well up in my eyes. I thought Jessica was trying to help me, but now I'm confused about why she wants to control my money when she didn't even know how much money there was. Jessica finally found her voice. Elena, I was just trying to protect you. You seemed so confused lately. Confused about what? I asked directly. About putting my glasses on my head? About what day it is? Jessica, I've been managing $12 million for over 20 years. Do you really think I can't handle my own finances because I occasionally forget where I put my reading glasses? The room erupted in uncomfortable silence. There's something else we need to discuss, Margaret said, pulling out a folder. Mrs. Castellanos asked us to investigate the facilities you've been recommending for her future care. We found some interesting information. She slid documents across the table. These are financial projections showing how long Mrs. Castellanos' supposed $400,000 would last at each facility, and what would happen when that money ran out. Jessica's face went from white to green. According to these calculations, Thomas continued, someone anticipated Mrs. Castellanos would be indigent within 3 to 4 years, at which point she'd transition to Medicaid coverage in a shared room at the state minimum reimbursement rate. I stared at Jessica, no longer hiding my intelligence behind a mask of confusion. You weren't planning to take care of me, were you, Jessica? You were planning to warehouse me until I died. Derek Walsh grabbed his briefcase. I think this meeting is over. Oh, but we're just getting started, Margaret said pleasantly. You see, we've been documenting this entire process. The pressure tactics, the misrepresentation of Mrs. Castellanos' capacity, the planning to access assets for purposes other than her care. It makes for very interesting reading. Patricia Hartwell looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. I think my client needs to consult with other counsel. That's probably wise, Thomas agreed, especially given that attempted financial exploitation of elderly persons is both a civil and criminal matter in this state. Jessica stood up shakily. Elena, you don't understand. I was trying to help. The kids need college money and you have so much. I have college money set aside for Connor and Sophia, I said calmly. In educational trusts that you can't touch. They'll be fine. But what about me? Jessica's voice cracked. Michael's gone, and I don't know how to manage without him. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered her voice on the phone, calling me an old hag and planning to send me away to die alone. You'll figure it out, I said, the same way I figured out how to build $12 million from nothing after my first husband died. As Jessica and her conspirators filed out of the conference room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks, complete control over my own life. Well, Margaret said, gathering the unsigned documents, I think that went well. What happens next? I asked. Next, Thomas said with satisfaction, we make sure Jessica understands that any further attempts to manipulate or exploit you will result in immediate legal action. But I had something else in mind, something that would ensure Jessica never tried this again with anyone else. The real game was just beginning. The ride back to Jessica's house was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of Jessica's occasional sniffles. I sat in the passenger seat, no longer bothering to maintain my facade of confusion. The game had changed, and we both knew it. When we pulled into the driveway, Jessica finally spoke. How long have you known? Known what? I asked, though we both understood what she meant. That I planned to. She couldn't finish the sentence. I heard you on the phone the first night I stayed here, I said quietly, when you called me an old hag and talked about sending me away once you got your hands on my money. Jessica's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. Elena, I need you to understand something. I'm drowning here. Michael's life insurance helped, but it wasn't enough. The house payments, the kids' expenses, my credit card debt. I didn't know what else to do. So you decided to steal from me. I wasn't going to steal. Jessica's voice rose defensively. I was going to make sure you were taken care of, and yes, use some of the money for the kids' future. That's not stealing. That's family helping family. I stared at her profile, noting the way she'd already rewritten history in her mind. Jessica, you researched nursing homes based on how quickly they would spend down my assets. You consulted with someone whose specialty is helping families steal from elderly relatives. You plan to have me declared incompetent based on the fact that I sometimes misplace my reading glasses. I was protecting you from making bad financial decisions. What bad financial decisions? I've been successfully managing $12 million for 20 years. My portfolio has consistently outperformed the market. My properties are all profitable. What exactly did you think you could do better? Jessica was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I didn't know about the other money. Because you never asked. You saw what you thought was a vulnerable old woman with some savings, and you decided to take advantage of that. The fact that there was more money doesn't change your intentions. We sat in the driveway for several more minutes before Jessica finally turned off the engine. As we walked toward the house, I made a decision. Jessica, we need to talk about the children. She stopped walking. What about them? They're going to need stability and security after everything they've been through. Losing their father, sensing the tension in this house, watching their mother plan to abandon their grandmother. I wasn't abandoning you, Jessica protested weakly. You were planning to put me in a substandard nursing home and forget about me. What would you have told Connor and Sophia when they asked to visit their grandmother? Jessica's face crumpled. I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was just so scared about money, about the future. We went inside, and I asked Jessica to sit down at the kitchen table. I had things to say that needed to be said clearly and completely. Here's what's going to happen, I began. First, I'm moving back to my own house. Today. Elena, please don't leave angry. We can work this out. I'm not angry, I said, which was true. The rage I'd felt earlier had crystallized into something colder and more purposeful. I'm disappointed, but I'm not angry. However, I am done pretending to be someone I'm not to make you comfortable. Jessica nodded miserably. Second, the children's education is secure. I've established trust funds that will cover their college expenses, graduate school if they choose, and provide them with modest starter funds for their adult lives. You cannot touch these funds. Elena, you don't have to. Yes, I do, because Michael would have wanted his children to have opportunities, and because they deserve better than being used as pawns in their mother's financial schemes. Jessica winced at the harsh words, but I continued. Third, you and I need to have a conversation about what happens next. Your financial situation is precarious, and that's not going to change just because you can't steal my money. I know, Jessica whispered. I've made such a mess of everything. Yes, you have. But the question is, what are you going to do about it? Before Jessica could answer, we heard the front door open and the sounds of Connor and Sophia coming home from school. I listened to their voices, their backpacks hitting the floor, the refrigerator opening, and I felt a pang of sadness for what I was about to lose. Grandma? Sophia appeared in the kitchen doorway. How was your meeting today? I looked at this beautiful girl, so much like her father at that age, and made another decision. It was enlightening, I said. Sophia, Connor, could you both come sit with us for a minute? There are some things we need to discuss. Connor joined us reluctantly, the way teenagers do when they sense serious adult conversation coming. Both kids looked between their mother and me, clearly picking up on the tension. First, I said, I want you both to know that I love you very much, and that will never change regardless of what happens between your mother and me. Their faces became alarmed. Second, I'm going to be moving back to my own house today. This was always meant to be a temporary arrangement. Why? Sophia asked, her voice small. Did we do something wrong? No, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong. Sometimes adults have disagreements about important things, and sometimes the best solution is to give each other some space. Connor, who was older and more perceptive, looked directly at his mother. What did you do, Mom? Jessica's face flushed. Connor, it's complicated. Your mother made some poor decisions, I said gently. She got scared about money and thought the solution was to take control of my finances without asking me. We had a disagreement about that today. You tried to steal from Grandma? Sophia's voice was shocked. It wasn't stealing, Jessica said desperately. I was trying to make sure everyone was taken care of. By lying about Grandma being confused so you could control her money? Connor's voice was flat, and I realized he'd overheard more of his mother's phone conversations than anyone knew. You knew? Jessica stared at her son. I'm not deaf, Mom. I heard you talking to that guy about power of attorney and nursing homes. I just didn't think you'd actually try to go through with it. The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and Sophia's quiet sniffles. Connor, Sophia, I said carefully, I want you to understand something very important. Your education is secure. I've made sure of that. You'll be able to go to college, and you'll have some financial help when you're ready to start your adult lives. What about Mom? Sophia asked. I looked at Jessica, who was staring at the table. Your mother is going to have to figure out how to manage her finances responsibly. That might mean selling this house and moving somewhere more affordable. It might mean getting a different job or working more hours. But those are choices she'll have to make. We might have to move? Connor asked. I don't know, I said honestly. That depends on what your mother decides to do. Jessica finally looked up. Elena, please. I know I messed up, but don't punish the kids for my mistakes. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm protecting myself and ensuring that Connor and Sophia have the opportunities they deserve. What you do with your life from here is up to you. I stood up and looked around the kitchen one last time. I'll need to pack my things. I'll help you, Grandma, Sophia said, wiping her eyes. Thank you, sweetheart. As we headed upstairs, I heard Jessica on the phone, presumably calling someone about her financial situation. It was a conversation she should have had months ago, before deciding that stealing from me was the easier solution. 2 hours later, Thomas Bradshaw arrived with a moving van to help transport my belongings back to my own house. The twins helped carry my suitcases and boxes, their faces solemn but determined. Will we still see you? Connor asked as we loaded the last box. Of course, I said, hugging him tightly. You're welcome at my house anytime, and I'll still be your grandmother no matter what. Jessica stood in the doorway watching us, her face pale and drawn. As the van pulled away, I saw her in the rearview mirror, looking small and alone. I felt a moment of sympathy for her, but it passed quickly. Jessica had made her choices. She'd seen a vulnerable elderly woman and decided to exploit her. The fact that she'd misjudged both my vulnerability and my resources didn't change the cruelty of her intentions. But there was one more thing I needed to do. One final move in the game that would ensure Jessica never tried this with anyone else. As we turned the corner toward my house, I pulled out my phone and dialed Linda Morrison. Linda, it's Elena. Are you ready to make those calls we discussed? Absolutely. To the Elder Abuse Hotline and the Attorney General's office? Yes, and make sure Derek Walsh's involvement is prominently featured in your report. Men like him prey on families in crisis, and it's time someone stopped him. I was going home to my own house, my own life, my own control. And I was going to make sure that what Jessica tried to do to me never happened to another elderly person if I could help it. The reckoning wasn't over. It was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee for Connor and Sophia, who had become regular visitors since I'd moved back home. The house felt alive again, filled with the sounds of teenagers doing homework at my dining room table and debating which college programs they wanted to pursue. The investigation into Derek Walsh had been swift and thorough. Linda Morrison's documentation of his methods, combined with testimonies from other families he'd targeted, had resulted in charges of elder financial abuse and conspiracy. He was currently awaiting trial, and his consulting business had been permanently shut down. Patricia Hartwell's law firm had quietly settled several complaints about their aggressive power of attorney practices. Word had spread quickly through the legal community that elder law cases involving questionable capacity claims would be scrutinized much more carefully. As for Jessica, the reckoning had been exactly as harsh as I'd expected. The house on Maple Street had been sold within 3 months. Without my assets to cushion her fall, Jessica had been forced to face the reality of her financial situation. The proceeds from the house sale had barely covered her debts, leaving her with enough for a small apartment and not much else. She'd found a job managing a small retail store, making about a third of what she'd earned in her previous position. It was honest work, but it meant long hours and a dramatically reduced lifestyle. "Grandma," Sophia called from the dining room, "can you help me with this college application essay?" "Of course, sweetheart." I brought my coffee to the table and sat beside her. "What's the prompt?" "Write about a person who has influenced your life and explain how they changed your perspective." I raised an eyebrow. "And who are you writing about?" Sophia looked at me seriously. "You. About how you taught me that being smart and strong doesn't mean you have to be loud about it." Connor looked up from his own homework. "She's been talking about what happened last spring for months, about how you let Mom think she was fooling you while you were actually 10 steps ahead." I felt a mixture of pride and concern. "I hope you both understand that what happened wasn't a game. Your mother was in a very difficult situation, And she made some poor choices. We know, Connor said quietly. But we also know what she was planning to do to you. We heard enough of those phone calls to understand. Sophia nodded. She was going to put you in a nursing home and take your money. That's not what families do to each other. The wisdom in their voices made my heart ache. They'd been forced to grow up too quickly, to see their mother's flaws too clearly. But they'd also learned important lessons about integrity and strength. How is she doing? I asked, though I already knew the answer from our brief conversations. She's working a lot, Connor said. And she's been going to some kind of financial counseling classes. She says she's trying to learn how to manage money better. That's good, I said, and meant it. Whatever Jessica's flaws, she was still their mother, and their relationship with her mattered. She asks about you sometimes, Sophia added, whether we think you'll ever forgive her. I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness is complicated, I said finally. I'm not angry anymore, and I hope she's learned from what happened. But trust, that takes much longer to rebuild. The front doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, Jessica stood on my porch holding a manila envelope. She looked different. Thinner, older, wearing a simple black dress that I recognized as one she'd owned for years. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. The glamorous woman who had married my son was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she'd learned what real work felt like. "Hello, Elena," she said quietly. "I hope it's okay that I came by. The kids said they were visiting, and I needed to give you something. Come in," I said, stepping aside. The twins looked up as their mother entered the dining room, their expressions carefully neutral. "Hi, Mom," Sophia said. "Hi, baby." "Connor." Jessica's voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. "I'm not staying long. I just wanted to give this to your grandmother." She handed me the envelope. Inside were legal documents that I recognized immediately. "These are the power of attorney papers from last spring," I said. "I never filed them," Jessica said. "I kept them, thinking maybe someday I could convince you to sign them anyway. But I've been in counseling, and my therapist helped me understand what I was really doing." She sat down heavily at the table, looking exhausted. "I was stealing from you. Not just money, but your dignity, your independence, your right to make your own choices. And I was using your grief over Michael to manipulate you into trusting me." The admission hung in the air between us. "I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything," Jessica continued. "I know I can't undo the harm I tried to cause. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I was doing, and I understand why you stopped me." I looked at this woman who had tried to destroy my life, who had planned to warehouse me in a nursing home while stealing my life savings. 6 months ago, I'd have felt satisfaction at seeing her brought low. Now I mostly felt sad. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now I learn to live within my means," Jessica said. "I pay my own bills, make my own mistakes, and take responsibility for my own choices, the way I should have been doing all along." Connor spoke up. "Mom, are you going to be okay?" Jessica smiled at her son, and for the first time in months, it looked genuine. "I'm going to be fine, honey. It's not the life I planned, but it's an honest life. That's more than I can say about what I was doing before." She stood to leave, then paused. "Elena, there's something else. I've been meeting with other families who've been through similar situations, people who tried to take advantage of elderly relatives, or who were approached by people like Derek Walsh. I'm trying to help them understand what they were really doing." "That's good," I said, surprised by this development. "It's the least I can do. I can't undo what I tried to do to you, but maybe I can help other people avoid making the same mistakes." After Jessica left, the twins and I sat in comfortable silence for a while. "Are you proud of her?" Sophia asked eventually. I thought about it. "I'm proud that she's taking responsibility for her actions. I'm proud that she's trying to make amends. Whether that's enough," I shrugged. "Time will tell." That evening, after the twins had gone home, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and thought about the strange journey the past year had taken me on. I'd lost my son, been betrayed by my daughter-in-law, discovered depths of cruelty I hadn't imagined, and ultimately emerged stronger and more independent than ever. My phone rang, and Thomas Bradshaw's name appeared on the screen. "Elena, I have some news you might find interesting," he said. "The Attorney General's office has opened a task force on elder financial abuse, and they want to use your case as an example of how seniors can protect themselves. They're asking if you'd be willing to speak at some community education events." I smiled, looking around my house, my sanctuary, my home that no one would ever take from me again. "I'd be honored," I said, because Jessica had taught me something valuable, even if she hadn't meant to. She'd taught me that survival isn't just about protecting what you have. It's about using your strength to protect others who might not be as fortunate, as prepared, or as stubborn as you are. I was 71 years old, worth $12 million, and sharper than I'd ever been, and I intended to spend whatever time I had left making sure that what Jessica tried to do to me never happened to anyone else. The game was over, but the real work was just beginning.